we're talking about, we're in the book of Mark now, and Jesus had walked out on the water. First, he had spent all day, and I talked to several people, and I do want to make clear, as you're reading the book of Mark, you'll find the same thing in the book of Matthew and in the book of Luke in different chapters, but I'll just tell you where it's at in the book of Mark tonight. Chapters 5. 6 and 7, possibly part of chapter 4. This all encompasses one day. One 24-hour period is when all this is taking place. You'll find the same thing in the book of Matthew, I believe it's chapter 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. John is like 16, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There's in each one of those Gospels, there is a snippet. There is a 24-hour period given to you of Jesus' entire day, start to finish. And not just the day, but sometimes it encompassed part of one day and another day, like this one, because he fed the 5,000. They went out on the, he's been teaching all day about the kingdom, fed the 5,000 at dinner time. They got in a boat, went out to the cross over the other side, big storm, everybody's scared to death. Jesus is walking out across the water, calms the storm, gets in a boat, calms the storm. They get to the other side, and he's doing more teaching. This is all nonstop 24-hour period that's being documented. So that's important to keep in mind for you to understand what's going on. So Jesus in Mark chapter 6, verse 48, they're out in the boat having a hard time. He's walking out on the water. Then he saw them straining, verse 48, at rowing, and the wind was against them, and the fourth watch of the night, 3 in the morning. He came to them walking on the sea and would have passed them by. And when he saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. That's where we stopped last week, verse 52. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. Now I'm going to stop you right there. What in the world does the loaves have to do with any of this 3 a.m. experience that they just had? They said they were marveled because they had not understood about the loaves. Doesn't make a lick of sense, does it? I mean, honestly, it is okay for us to admit to ourselves that something Jesus did or said is absolute gibberish. We don't know what he meant. This is one of those times. That is a clue. That's a clue. It is an absolute clue. This right here, this was about 4 years ago. This verse 52, what you're looking at right there, opened a door to me in my spirit, in my mind, that has been open ever since and has been a crazy ride. This verse right here. Because it stood out to me, and I have not a clue what in the world that means. And like everything else, I don't understand it, didn't mean it, so we passed it by. It's fine. One day we'll understand it. No. There are deeper things in the Bible, and there are clues that says this is something much deeper. It's a key to understanding the kingdom of God. Because Jesus has already told them, we read it 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago. He said, but for you, you are supposed to know, or it is made known, the mysteries of the kingdom of God. You're supposed to understand and figure out the mysteries. So whenever you see something in here, verse 52 doesn't make a lick of sense. That's a clue. It should be a clue to you. This is a big piece of evidence. It's a door you need to open up and figure this thing out. And a lot of times you need the Lord's help with that. What in the world? They didn't understand about the loaves. Well, what loaves are they talking about? You understand I'm saying this all happened in one day. Less than 6 hours or less than 9 hours ago, what were they doing? Feeding 5,000. With how many loaves? 5. So we're talking about 5 loaves, okay? They didn't understand about the 5 loaves, okay? That still doesn't make a lot of sense, even though we know what loaves are talking about. Well, if I bring you back earlier in the day, this has been weeks ago we read on this, Jesus has been teaching on the kingdom. This happened at 6 p.m. when the people were hungry, and they fed them at 5,000. Fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves. 6 hours earlier, it was noon. Do you remember who was hungry at noon? You might have to think back to this. No cheating. Who was hungry 6 hours earlier at noon? Anybody remember? It was the disciples. The disciples were hungry, and they were walking through a field and were picking the cloves, or in some translations, the corn, off of the stalks in the field. And remember, the Pharisees were saying, hey, you can't do that. It's Sabbath day. You can't do that. Any of this ringing a bell? This happened on the same day, okay, earlier. The disciples were hungry. Jesus told, get you some cloves of barley off the stalks there, eat. And the Pharisees were like, hey, you cannot pick the barley on the Sabbath day. And Jesus said, yes, we can. You don't even know the law. And then Jesus said, and I'll have to look back in Mark to see if it references it here. However, because I know that this particular day is also documented in the book of Matthew, chapter 9, okay, and going on 9, 10, 11, 12. I also happen to know that Jesus told the Pharisees that day, he said, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? And he ate of the table of showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priests. And Jesus said that. Does that make any sense to you? I'm just asking honestly. No. Make any sense? What in the world does these guys picking barley off of the stalks have to do with, do you remember what David did when he was hungry and ate the table of showbread, which was not worthy to eat except for the priests? None of this makes any sense. And Jesus has been saying stuff here and there. And now we get to this part and he says, they did not understand about the loaves because their heart was hardened. Now, I've already told you this last week, the disciples' mistake of faith this night was that they did not remember and did not realize what Jesus had already done. Jesus has already calmed a storm, right? He did it earlier. Remember, he's asleep in the boat. Woke him up, we're going to die. He calmed the storm. They marveled. Who's this man that can calm the wind and the seas to obey? Jesus gave them power to do what he did, cast out demons, heal the sick. They get in another storm. He sits back on the mountain to see what they do. Why? Because he's wanting to see if they're going to have faith. They've already seen what he can do with a storm. They know they have power given to them by his authority. He was waiting to see if any of them would have enough faith to stand up and calm the storm. They didn't, okay? What does that have to do with loaves? Okay, so let's go back. Jesus fed 5,000 with 5 loaves. All right. But earlier that day, he's responding to the Pharisees and saying, have you not read what David did? Okay? Now I'm going to have to take you back a little further. In the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 21, I believe. Don't turn there. I'm going to tell you the story. David is on the run. He's not king. Saul is king, and Saul's trying to kill him. David is on the run. He's hiding from Saul, and he's leaving town, basically, but he needs supplies for his men. So he goes to the tabernacle, okay? The priest is at the tabernacle, answers the door, scared to death. Here's David. If Saul finds David here, he'll kill all of us. What do you want? David's like, we need bread. And he tells them all this stuff. I need bread for my journey. And the priest said, there is no bread here except for the loaves on the table of showbread. Okay? Any good scholars out there know how many in the tabernacle and in the temple, how many loaves of bread were on the table of showbread I know you know, so you don't count. 12, very good. 12 loaves on the table of showbread. How many days did they keep them there? Or how long did that have to last? Had to last for 6 days. And then they had to replenish them, okay, on the Sabbath. David did not ask for 12 loaves. How many loaves did David ask for? He did not ask for 2. He did not ask for 12. How many loaves did David ask the priest for that day? David asked the priest for 5 loaves that day, okay? Which is weird, because he's needing to stock up supplies for him and his men. Now, 1 loaf will feed 1 family for 1 day, so obviously he can feed 5 people for a day, you know, or he can feed himself for 5 days, or whatever. He's got enough supplies to get where he's going. But he purposefully requested 5 loaves. I've debated the last few days how deep I'm going to get on this. And so I'm going to try and go medium, okay, on this. David understood something about the patterns of God. Now, don't read too much into this, and I just want you to see that the pattern is there, okay? David understood that God operates in different patterns and different numbers, okay? God designed things in patterns and numbers. That's why there's 12 months in a year. There was 12 tribes of Israel. There's 12 disciples. 12 is all about completion of organization. God's number of organization, okay? 12 months, 12 tribes, 12 disciples. 12 loaves on the table of showbread, you know, all that kind of stuff. God's number of completion is 7. Perfection, 7. 7 days in a week, you know. Completion, 7 years in a Jubilee cycle. All of this, you know, it's pattern. All it is patterns. God operates in patterns. David, I believe, understood that God operates in certain patterns and that God is always up to something. How many knows God is always about to do something? But when God is about to do something, it can be recognized in his patterns. And again, this is where I wouldn't even plan on going this deep, but we will tonight, just for kicks and giggles. The pattern of the number 5 seems to keep coming up in history when God is about to do something. Okay? When God was about to create man, he did so after 5 days of creation. When God told Noah to build an ark, it was after Noah had lived for 500 years. Okay? When the Israelites conquered the Canaan land, they first had to defeat 5 major kings. Before David could destroy all the Philistines, they had to destroy 5 Philistine cities. Just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, and the number 5, the number 5, the number 5. Before you enter into the holy place in the tabernacle, you pass through 5 pillars. It's just it just keeps coming up. That pattern just keeps coming up, and it's always the pattern of what comes next is God's going to move in a really big way. I'm not going to go any deeper than that. I'm just going to leave it there so you do understand that pattern is there. I don't know what it means. I don't know where it came from. But I think David at some point recognized it. I don't know how. I don't even know the extent of it. But I know that he recognized a pattern somewhere. Because does anybody remember the day he was a little boy, 1 Kings 17, I'll go fight this giant. He's going to fight one giant. How many stones did he get from the brook? My whole life they've told me it's because Goliath had 4 brothers. That's great. Preaches real good. But there's not really scriptural proof of that. So it preaches good to say Goliath had 4 brothers. David's going to go take on the whole family. Yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. Makes for really good preaching. But I don't really have scripture to back that up. But David did choose that day to pick up 5 stones. I wonder if he recognized something. I don't know. It's really weird to me. And you always have heard me say there's no such thing as coincidence. And now on this day, David's about 20 years later running from King Saul. He's about to leave town. He's got 12 loaves of bread at his disposal, and he asks for 5. So Jesus teaches about this, rebukes the disciples about, have you not read what David did? He's trying to get the disciples to dig deeper. Guys, look at deeper in this story. There's more there than just some guy asking for bread. The disciples didn't get it. And so later that day, 6 hours later, 5,000 hungry people. And Jesus said, how much do we have to feed them with? And they turned around and said, we ain't got nothing but 5 loaves. And Jesus is like, well, what a coincidence. I've been orchestrating this whole day trying to get you to see. The same God that worked for David is here with you today on this hillside. And the same God who's working with David when all David had was 5 loaves is still here today, the one teaching, when all we have is 5 loaves. It can be done. Guys, just get the bread and pass it out. We only have 5 loaves. So did David, and he took Israel. You know, it's okay. So the message was, what God has done before, he'll do again. So now the disciples missed it when he taught it at noon. They missed it when he did it at 12. And now they have proven that they are just not getting the point that Jesus is trying to teach and saying, what I've done before, calm the storm, I'll do again, don't worry. And so the fact that they were scared and thought they'd die in the second storm, Jesus said, they ain't got it. They don't get it. They totally missed it. They had not understood about the loaves. That's what that means, verse 52. You didn't even understand about the loaves. You're not getting it. You're not seeing the point. So I wonder if there's going to be, if the third time's a charm. I wonder. Okay? So let's keep, he's trying, guys, what I've done before, I can do it again, have faith. Okay? I've calmed the storm before, I'll do it again, have faith. Verse 53. When they crossed over, he came to land of Gennesaret and anchored there. When they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized them, ran through the whole surrounding region and began to carry out beds on who were sick. And wherever they heard he was, wherever he entered into villages or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Now, wait a minute. Verse 56. What are people wanting to do? Touch the hem of his garment. Why? Because even though 12 disciples aren't getting it, his message is coming clear. What I've done before, I can do again. So guess what story people had heard about? That woman touched the hem of his garment. And so now what do they want to do? And guess what's happening to them? They're getting healed because they're getting it. They're understanding what the disciples are not getting. Okay? Chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Pharisees, some of the scribes, came together of him having come from Jerusalem. Now when they saw some of the disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, the unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. Now stop right there. This is not saying, what's that? It's not saying they didn't wash their hands. It's saying they didn't do it properly. So what are the Pharisees doing? The Pharisees are looking at the way that the youth group is worshiping, and they're saying, that's not how we do it. They're not right. You know, I'm just trying to compare it to a modern day comparison. Or, you know, they're not doing things the way we think it ought to be done, so they're obviously wrong, right? Because people who don't think the way you think are wrong, right? You'd think that's how it is, but actually you have just as much chance of being wrong as they do. Before I go any further with this, I'm half tempted to do this, and I think I will. Give me just a second here. I might as well. I really want to put the kicker on. I want to put the cherry on top of this, what we've been talking in the last 10 minutes. What Jesus has done before, he'll do it again. Give me just a second. I have to do things off the top of my head here. Oh, Lord. Talk amongst yourselves. We're doing good. We're doing good. Okay. Almost there. Almost there. Almost there. Almost there. Did you guys have a good day? Wasn't too hot? I did not get the grass cut. I'll do that tomorrow. No? Wasn't too bad? Okay. When Jesus went to the other side with the disciples, and it's the next morning, and he's teaching. Now, Mark chapter, what we just read in Mark chapter 6, verses 53, 54, 55, 56. Okay? If you go to Matthew, I'll just read this for you. Matthew chapter 15, you'll get the same story, but you'll get more details. Okay? This is the next day, the following day. Jesus is sitting around. This is Mark chapter 6, 53, 54, 55, 56. However, it's in Matthew chapter 15. Give more details. Now, Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. Well, now, wait, whoa, wait a minute. We've heard this story before, right? No. The story you're thinking of is a couple chapters back in Matthew. This is the next day. Same thing has happened. Crowd of 4,000 people now. They've lost 1,000, but give or take, not bad. But now they're hungry. Jesus is saying the same thing he said yesterday. I don't want to send them away. They're hungry. Feed them. Verse 33, the disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to feed such a great multitude? That's what they said yesterday. Do you understand what Jesus is having to deal with these 12 goofballs? They're just not getting it. I had to calm a storm the other day. I thought they learned. They got in a storm themselves. They didn't learn. I had to feed 5,000 yesterday with 5 loaves. I did it. No problem. Didn't even break a sweat. Today, we got 4,000. And the disciples are, where in the world are we going to get enough bread? Do you all remember how many baskets were left over? 12 baskets. Where'd they go? They brought them with them. They got bread. People, and this is through the course of the day, this 12 baskets has come around to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, up at Bethsaida. And there they are, and they got bread. But now it's come time for the multitude to eat. Where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7, and a few fish. Well, good Lord, yesterday you only had 5. That fed 5,000. Today you got 4,000. You got more loaves. This is a breeze, guys. No, they don't get it. It's when people are like, oh, the level of compassion that Jesus had. Yeah, you don't understand just how much compassion he had. He spent 3 years with 12 goofballs who gave him such a hard time. They're just not getting it. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks, broke them, gave them to the disciples. The disciples gave the multitude, so they ate and were filled. And they took up 7 large baskets of the fragments that were left. Now those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. He sent away the multitude, got in the boat, and came to Magdala. So that's what happened there in 53, 54, 55, 56. Mark didn't give all those details, but Matthew did. So it just puts the cherry on the Sunday, ice cream sundae. Jesus is having such a hard time with these guys, okay? They just don't get it. We read verse 1, 2, and 3. Got people eating bread, not washing their hands the way the Pharisees think they ought to. Verse 4. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there were many other things which they received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. And the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? He answered and said to them, well, did Isaiah the prophet of you hypocrites, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Isaiah prophesied that roughly 500 years before Christ, almost 600 years before, around 600 years before Christ. Isaiah wrote that prophecy. It's in the 29th chapter of Isaiah, and it says, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And he's telling Isaiah was talking about an enemy that would come in the time of the Messiah. And what would the enemy do? They would do this, what he just said. And Jesus is saying, you hypocrites are exactly who Isaiah was talking about. Jesus had much compassion in the way that he spoke to sinners, drunkards, harlots, thieves, murderers, wine bibbers, whatever you want to call them, all the stuff that the Bible lists. But he held no punches when he talked to the Pharisees. He just called them hypocrites. He called, in another place, he said, you brood of vipers, you generation of vipers, you forked-tongued bunch of serpents, is what he said, and many times he called them that. I mean, he told them who they really were. And that, to me, means, Jesus was coming to do away with what these men were doing. He's doing away with traditional teaching. Verse 8, for laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do. He said to them, all too well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. See, Jesus is bringing up the law, because the Pharisees don't mind bringing up the law when they're wanting to criticize what his disciples are doing and all this stuff. And Jesus is saying, look, you want to bring up the law? You're bringing up your traditional teachings, the commandments of men. Let me bring up Moses' law for you. If you don't honor your mother, or if you curse your father and mother, you ought to be put to death. Who's he saying this to? He's saying this to Pharisees. Who are the Pharisees? And some of them Sadducees, and there's a difference, okay? Completely different. These guys weren't partners together, Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees were, keepers of the law and teachers of their law. Sadducees were not. Sadducees were political figures. They could care less. They were basically the rich men, and they were political and all that kind of stuff. But he's talking to these people, and he's saying, if you curse your father or mother, he's talking to people that work their way up the ladder. And how many people know in the secular world, many times the only way you can work your way up the ladder is you got to cut the legs out from some people. You got to throw some people under the bus, whatever you want to call it, whatever cliche you want to use. When people have worked their way up here, in the secular world, it's usually because they have got there on the backs of the people that they cut down. A lot of times. They have let other people take the fall for things. They have abandoned people. That's why a lot of times you find the people that have worked so hard in the secular world to work their way up really hard, they're the ones with a lot of family problems. They're the ones with all this kind of stuff. That's because God's design is the only design that works. And in the kingdom, you don't work your way up by cutting others down. You actually work your way up by humbling yourself. It's all, the kingdom of God is completely backwards from the kingdom of man. However, so he's talking to these Pharisees and Sadducees. You can bet some men in the crowd are not honoring their mother and father, meaning they're not taking care of them in their elderly age. Maybe they've abandoned them because they're working their way up this political ladder or whatever. And so a lot of them have left their family behind. They're not honoring their father and mother. So he's saying right to them, the law says if you've cursed your mother and father, you need to be put to death. You really want to talk about the law? I'm talking about who's keeping the law and who's not? Verse 11, but I say, if a man says to his mother or father, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban, that is a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition which you have handed down, and many such things you do. I'm going to ask the question I've already asked before. Does that make a lick of sense to you? No. It doesn't. Sometimes when Jesus said something and it doesn't make a lick of sense to me, you got to consider the crowd he's talking to. In this case, he's being very specific about what he's saying. Here, what is he saying? If a man says to his mother and father, whatever profit or whatever has been given to you from me is korban, that is a gift to God. What's he saying? He's saying, see, these are people that should be taking care. They didn't have Social Security in those days. They didn't have Social Security, pensions, all that kind of stuff. How did mother and father live in their retirement age? Kids took care of them. Okay? They financially took care of their parents. What he's saying is, some of y'all are going home and looking at mom and dad and saying, for your sake, as your gift from me, I have given financially in your name to the temple. Giving, exactly. You want to say that again so I can hear it? Exactly. Has anyone ever at Christmas time like gotten one of those gifts or gotten a card, Christmas card for somebody, and it said a donation has been made in your name to such and such? Merry Christmas. You remember how you feel when you got that and you were like, gee, thanks, you know? Real nice. And you're even wondering if they even gave anything anyway. Maybe they just printed the card, you know what I mean? Like George Costanza, you know, they just printed the card out and gave it to you. That's what these guys were doing. They're supposed to financially be supporting mom and dad, but instead, they're really trying to get ahead at the temple, and they're trying to work their way up the ladder. You do so with financial gifts. So the money they should have been taking care of mom and dad with, they turned around and gave it to the temple. And they went to mom and dad and said, your financial gift from me is korban, you know, Greek for the gift given to God, their tithe. What you know, they're saying that was your gift. Real nice, you know. And that's what evidently these guys were doing. And Jesus called them right out on it. He's saying, you guys that are doing this, you're cursing your own mother and father. And according to Moses, y'all ought to be put to death for doing it. Okay, verse 14, and when he had called all the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. In verse 16, his famous sentence, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. What does that mean? If you dig deep enough, if you're looking for it deeper, dig deeper, there's more to what I just said than what you heard. Well, what did he say? There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. What in the world does that mean? What was Jesus saying? Exactly. So what is it? That's verse 16. Well, what does 15 mean? Nothing that enters a man from outside can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. What does that mean? Jesus is talking to the group of Pharisees who traditionally believe that if they don't wash their hands properly in the traditional manner and don't wash the cups, if they don't stick to the religious traditions, then they are defiling their spirit. Jesus is saying, guys, I have got a news flash for you. You can eat bread without washing your hands the way that your traditions say, and you'll be just as saved tomorrow as you were yesterday. That's what he's saying. The things that you do outwardly, keeping traditions, are not what defile you. What defiles is what comes out, not what goes in, but what comes out. Okay? This is a really hard scripture to get on because when it comes to, anybody ever heard the term carnal Christianity, carnal Christians? Have you ever heard somebody say, I'm a carnal Christian? I have. Some of you might not have heard that. I have. And it usually happens when you get in like an argument, or not an argument, but you're just talking and you're saying, well, I don't think that a Christian ought to do this or do that. And a lot of that has to do with things that are traditional, things that we have grown up, teaching, thinking. So we're talking about things that we should or should not be drinking, alcohol, shouldn't be smoking. Oh, good Lord, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, nothing take you to hell quicker than smoking a cigarette. I'm dead serious. And, all this kind of stuff. And what was funny to me was you'd have preachers up on the pulpit preaching against these things, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And they would say, because the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit and you should not defile the body, which is true. But what got me was the guys who were preaching this were 350 pounds. They didn't have a cigarette problem. They had a fork problem. And they were just as much defiling their bodies as some of these guys have to take a smoke break on the sidewalk. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, well, how's come one applies and not the other? And then Jesus is trying to talk to that crowd right there. The crowd who has no intentions of keeping any form of lawful holiness themselves, but they will quickly judge others on their inability to keep the traditions. That's who these guys are, and that's who Jesus is talking to. He said, newsflash for you guys. People are going to make it to heaven who did not keep your traditions. I've actually heard, there's people that I know, I can't really say this because most people like me, but there's preachers, really good preachers I know, and they've got enemies. And they've said to me, and they've said, you know what's going to really just tick people off is when they get to heaven and they see that I'm there too. That's going to make them so mad because they've spent their whole life thinking I ain't going because I ain't like them, And Jesus is saying, newsflash, guys, there's going to be people that make it into the kingdom that didn't wash their hands. Sorry. I understand it's your tradition. I understand it's your doctrine that you've been teaching. But it's not hand washing that's going to get you there. That's what he's saying. The things which come from the outside, there's nothing that enters a man from the outside which can defile him. And so that's where you get some people, and like I said, carnal Christianity. When people say, well, I'm a carnal Christian, and that's usually when they're talking and trying to make an excuse for things in their lives, like they go to the clubs on Saturdays, and they drink, and they do all this kind of stuff, and they drink, get drunk, do all the stuff you ought not be doing, and just really living in ways that the Bible calls sinful, but still want to be a church-going Christian. And so they've come up with the term, this is carnal Christianity, okay? And we'll go to this scripture and we'll say, well, Jesus said nothing can enter a man that can defile him. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is what he said. What Jesus is talking about is The soul inside of a man cannot simply, in and of itself, be defiled simply from an outside source coming in. It can't. Because that soul has to is what has to be defiled. That spirit is in control. Okay? So, yes, absolutely. A person can remain righteous in the eyes of God. Whew, this is a tricky subject to talk about. Yes, a person can remain righteous in the eyes of God, even though the enemy is trying to defile them. What defiles is when it affects what's coming out. You understand what I'm saying? My wife, several years ago, she did something that made me oh so proud. Blew my mind. She went dumpster diving. And she didn't actually jump in a dumpster. That's a term, dumpster diving. She found, in the alley, she found a perfectly good cooler that somebody had thrown away. I think because one of the wheels had come off. We didn't care. We don't need a wheel. It still works. She got the cooler and she brought it home. Big cooler. And we go camping a lot. She said, it's a $50 or $60 cooler. I got a cooler outside, brand new to us. I just need you to clean it. Sure, I can clean this thing. So I did. I got the bleach, whatever, sponges, whatever. I got all this stuff. I cleaned the inside of that cooler. You could lick the inside of this cooler. It was so clean. It was sterile. You could use it in surgery. It was so clean, the inside. Closed the lid. Honey, it's clean. She came out and took one look. That's filthy. The outside, I didn't clean the outside. Every man in this room knows we think in one way, practicality. That's it. That's why we as men have no idea why you need all those extra pillow shams on the bed that we're not allowed to lay our head on. You know, we don't understand that because we think in practicality. So I'm thinking cooler, ice, inside. That's where it needs to be clean. I cleaned the inside. So in all practicality, it was definitely clean enough to use. So what's the problem with it being dirty on the outside? Well, my wife proceeded to explain it to me. She explained to me, and it made perfect sense. Well, honey, when we go to the campsite, or when we go to the picnic, and we bring all of your Diet Mountain Dew, mine, not hers, in the ice, and there it sits, bottled water in there, and we tell people, what we have in here is good. Come and get all you want. Guess what? They're going to look at that nasty, dirty cooler, and guess what they're going to think? I don't want what comes out of that. Even though it's clean. It's perfectly clean in there. And everything in there is clean. It's great. No bacteria, nothing. It's clean. Yeah, but there's I don't know, what's that, radiator fluid? Something, I don't know what's stained the outside of this thing. It's nasty. So guess what? They don't want what's on the inside. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. The inside can be perfectly clean. But guess what? People are not going to want. They don't want what comes out of you if the outside looks defiled. So that's why Paul and Jesus said, not just to abstain from sin, but to abstain from the very appearance of sin. Why? Because ain't nobody going to want what's coming out of your vessel. Well, it's clean. You don't know my heart. Doesn't matter. You need people, for you to be effective in ministry and in the kingdom, people are going to need to desire what's in you. And just like the cooler at the picnic, ain't nobody going to want what's in that filthy thing, even though it's clean inside. Doesn't matter. So, we balance Scripture 15. Yes, nothing can go inside and defile because the soul itself is not controlled by outside influences. It's controlled by your conscious decisions you make, right? So, keep that in mind. Spend a lot of time on that when we can keep going. Verse 16, anyone has ears to hear. Verse 17, When he entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. He said to them, "Are you thus without understanding also? Did you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? Because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach." See, he's talking about the superficial level. He's talking about, look, them eating this dirty bread, it's not going to defile their heart with dirty hands, because it goes in the stomach. He's saying, that's the superficial version of what I just said, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. So yes, a person is not a liar until it's come out of them, right? They're not a blasphemer until it has come out of them. However, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. That's why, and I don't want to get too deep. There's a difference between iniquity and sin. Iniquity is the predisposition inside of the flesh, where you have that tendency, and temptation will cause you to act on that, and now you have sinned. The action of. Okay. All these things do get a little tricky, but we're going to read on, and it does balance out, and Jesus is going to talk about it. Okay. Verse 24, from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but it could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her. So the fact that she's a Greek means that she is not a Jew. She's not a Jew. Okay? But Jesus said to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Whoa. It sounds like Jesus just said, honey, I'd love to help you, but you're not a Jew. I've got to help all the Jews first, because it's not good to take what's for the Jews, and throw it to the dogs. Whoa. What did he just say? I mean, that does not sound very Christ-like, right? But he said it. Wow. That's rough. So, verse 28. And she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying in the bed. This is a tricky one. This is a tough set of verses to teach on, and most preachers won't touch it because they won't even quote it. They won't even talk about it, because this is a tough one to teach on. Because it indeed does sound like Jesus is saying, I can't help you because you're not a Jew. I've got to help all the Jews first. And then symbolically called her a dog, to which she replied, yes, but even the dogs get to eat scraps that fall from the master's table. Wow. What in the world is going on in this story? Well, once again, this story happened in the book of John as well. John brings this story up. And the fact that John brings it up is extremely interesting. So I'm going to turn to the book of John. I had that written down wrong. Sorry, it is hard. Sometimes I'm not able to keep things in my brain the way that I want to do it. I usually can keep things in my memory. Something about getting older. People keep telling me, you get older and you can't remember as much as you wanted to remember. I'm not getting older. Okay, book of Matthew. I had it wrong. Book of Matthew, chapter 15. I'm going to read this to you. Jesus went out and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. This is the same story. It's just Matthew telling the story. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. But he answered her not a word, and his disciples came and urged to say, send her away, for she cries out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. She came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not good to take away the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. See, once again, Matthew recorded it the same way. She said, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs shall eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. And Jesus answered and said to her, woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from her that very hour. So this is Matthew recording the same exact story, but again, giving a few extra details. What I wanted to show you is Jesus is hearing the woman, and she cried out in verse 22 of Matthew 15, and Matthew records that she says, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. Now, what does it mean for him to be called Son of David? He's not Son of David. He's son of Joseph. Why is she calling him Son of David? Because according to the prophecies of Isaiah, the Messiah shall come out of the root of Jesse, out of the house of David. And that he will be recognized as a son of David by a Jew and by a Gentile. Okay? He has not been called Son of David by a Jew yet. But he's been called Son of David by a Gentile. That caught Jesus' ear. Okay? It is true. Jesus is saying, I have come to the house of the Jews first. Here's what you need to know. The timing had to be right. Okay? Jesus was not refusing to minister to a person because they were a Gentile. He's going to do that later anyway. He's going to minister to a Roman centurion, not a Jew. But this woman has come and has jumped the gun. It's not time yet, but Jesus knows what's in this woman's heart. And as soon as she cries out, Son of David, she has fulfilled a prophecy. And now, he's going to, through grace, allow this woman's need to be met. Okay? It was not the time of the Gentiles yet. Not saying that Jesus wouldn't minister to them. It's just that Jesus needed the timing to be right. But because this woman, It's too much to delve into. She called him son of David. Anybody know the Jew who called him son of David, by the way? The blind man. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. That happened days before his death. Okay, this is happening early in his ministry. A Jew and a Gentile have to recognize him as son of David. This woman is the Gentile who did it. The blind man was the Jew who did it. Okay? So prophecy is fulfilled. This woman is fulfilling prophecy. Jesus heals her daughter. Okay? Again, maybe next week I'll have time to get more into it. Again, departing from the region of Tyre, Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of the Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. They brought to him one who was deaf, and who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hands on him. And he took him aside from the multitude, put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven. He sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his speech was loosed, and he spoke plainly. And he commanded them that they should tell no one. But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. And he makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Now, Jesus, we're going to close right now, okay? But Jesus has healed and will heal a lot of people. This is the first time he's ever had to put his fingers in somebody's ears and spit, do some weird stuff. What's he doing? In the world is he doing? You'll find out next week. Why did he have to do that on this particular occasion? And what is this, Ephphatha, that is, be open. What does that have to do with any of it? What? Oh, not next week. Yeah, the week after. You have an extra week of homework to really look this up and try and figure it out. Can you find it? What does all this mean? Why do you have to do it? Okay, that's it, guys. Thank you very much.